Hello everyone, what's going on? I'm Gareth, the Master974, back again today. Welcome to another Source Shorts video, and today I'm going to be demonstrating how you can add the ability to lower the weapon when you sprint in your Source 2013 single player mod. This isn't going to work in Source 2013 multiplayer mods, and I'll get to the reason why a little bit later. But as you can see from the video footage here, if I stand still and press the sprint button, the weapon won't lower, but if I sprint and move, then the weapon will lower, and if I run out of auxiliary power and therefore no longer sprint, then the weapon should rise up and you can use it again. Now, there is actually a Valve Developer Wiki guide talking about this, which I have open over here, and this goes over the bare basic implementation. One thing to note is that the view model has to have ActiveEM idle lowered inside of the actual model or view model information, so if it doesn't have that, then this won't work. So that's just something to keep in mind. So for example, I don't believe the crowbar, the gravity gun, the frag grenade or the bug bait gets affected by this in normal Half-Life 2 terms. And I guess in Source 2013 multiplayer mods, the stun stick would also be included in that, but everything else should work. But anyway, this is the bare basic implementation. So what you want to do is go to base combat weapon shared.h, and it doesn't really matter where it goes, but it recommends underneath line 211, sorry I can't talk, underneath the is view model sequence finished line, and then go to base combat weapon shared.cpp, above item post frame, just selects the code, right click, copy, paste it in above the item post frame function, and then inside of the item post frame function, just add in there somewhere process animation events. That's pretty much all you really need to do. But as you may notice here, all that this code really does, especially process animation events, is it just checks to see if the player is holding the button related to sprinting. So if you're just standing still, not moving, but press the sprint button, then the weapon lowers. And if you run out of auxiliary power while sprinting, then the weapon will be, it will be in the lowered position even though you're actually not sprinting anymore, you'll be walking. So that is something that I've decided to fix and I'm going to outline here. Just to start with, in base combat weapon shared.h, I just decided to add the process animation events function and the m_b weapon is lowered stuff. In this area that talks about weapon behavior, it's just a bit more appropriate, but as I said, it doesn't really matter where it goes. But then in base combat weapon shared.cpp, I decided to do this instead. Now there is some code that requires access to the CHL2 player class. So what you need to do is at the very top of the file with the hashtag include stuff is do hashtag include of HL2 player shared.h. And going back to process animation events, what I decided to do was create a pointer to a CHL2 player and do it as an assert cast. You can do dynamic cast, but all that really matters is that assert cast is a static cast when using the release version of the code. But typecast the C-base player to a CHL2 player, check if it's valid, return if not. And then instead of checking if the player is holding the sprint button, you can just simply check to see if the player is actually sprinting. But then you also need to check to see if the player's velocity is greater than 0 in the X and Y axes. So you do that by doing f_abs and then in brackets p_player arrow get abs velocity with brackets after it.x and make sure it's greater than 0.0f. And I decided to do as an OR condition because you can be going in simply the X axis or the Y axis. So just check to see if that velocity is greater than 0, and if so, then we should lower. So this will keep into account situations where we shouldn't be sprinting because we run out of auxiliary power, or we stay still. So we stop moving, therefore we're not sprinting, but we're still holding the shift key, for example, to sprint. And then in the else if condition here, we check to see if we are no longer sprinting or the velocity in the X and Y axes are 0, or X or Y axis is 0, I should say. So if the weapon is lowered, but the player is no longer sprinting, or the player's come to a standstill, then it should allow the weapon to rise up and then we can fire the weapon again, is what's going on there. I haven't changed anything else in any of the other parts of the code, so you can see that's where the process animation events line goes in item post frame. And yeah, that's all I really did there, but there's going to be a couple of other issues. For example, if I was to just show you this code at this point, then you'll see the weapon kind of bob up and down when you're sprinting, as if it's going from the idle position to the idle lowered, but then back to the idle position again instead of just staying in the lowered position. So for that, I do need to give a thank you to my Discord server for trying to help out with this. But what was suggested was that you go to base HL combat weapon shared.cpp, and again, you can do this pointer to the player. I just do a dynamic cast in this case, but I guess you can use a cert cast as well. But typecast the owner of the base HL combat weapon to a CHL2 player, and then check to see if the player is valid, check to see if the player is sprinting, and if the absolute velocity in the X or the Y axis is greater than 0. And if all of that is true, then just return true in weapon should be lowered. That way the weapon will lower if you're sprinting and you're actually moving. So that fixes that issue. There's a couple weapons that might have issues still, even with this. First off is the shotgun, because that completely overrides the item post frame function, so you need to add process animation events in there. I decided to add it underneath the pointer check to the player to make sure the play is valid. And the other issue is with the crossbow, because that you can actually right click to use the zoom feature, and that is something that you probably don't want to do. So I just simply added above the check zoom toggle line inside of item post frame to just say if M2FR next secondary attack is lower than GP Global's arrow cur time. That way it should allow you to zoom when you're not sprinting, but when you are sprinting and the weapon's lowered, then you should no longer be able to zoom. So that's just what you can do there. And so if I was to save and compile the code, and you can check this out, then what you should notice is that when you sprint, the weapon lowers, you'll no longer be able to attack, whether it's a primary or secondary attack. And if you're standing still, the weapon raises, so you can primary and secondary attack again. If you run out of auxiliary power, i.e. you're no longer sprinting, then the weapon should raise and you can primary secondary attack again. And that's all the situations I can think of, so hopefully that works. But now let's get on to why this doesn't work in Source 2013 multiplayer mods. I actually don't know why. Instead of the weapon should be lowered function inside the base HL combat weapon shares.cpp, you'd actually need to put that change that I just showed you earlier inside of weapon HL2 MP base HL MP combat weapon. Bit of a mouthful, but there is a weapon should be lowered function inside of that file, and then in there you just need to do the same sort of thing that I've outlined previously. Just create a pointer to a CHL2 MP player instead, but everything else should be exactly the same. But even if you were to do that, then at least in my experimentation, it just doesn't seem to work. The weapon doesn't lower. And the only weapon it seems to work with is the pistol, but even then it kind of does the bobbing up and down issue that I talked about earlier. And I don't really know what to do to resolve this, so if you have any ideas about how to get this to work in Source 2013 multiplayer mods, then please let me know, because I really don't have a clue as to why this doesn't work. I think if you use the RPG, it gives you the best illustration of what's being done, that it's trying to lower but then get raised on consecutive frames, so it doesn't do anything. It's a bit strange, but I really don't know what to say about that. But at least what I've outlined in this video would add this feature in Source 2013 single player mods. So that's what we'll have to deal with for now. But if you found this helpful in any way, then like the video, let me know what you think. If you have any other suggestions, then feel free to let me know. And hopefully this has helped you out. So thanks for watching, take care there, peace out, see you later, have a great day. And hopefully the next video won't take me a million years to make. So see you for that video, check out some of the other videos on the channel, and see you later. Thanks for watching everyone.